Okay, welcome to today's episode of the Australian Lawn and Garden Podcast. This is the most requested podcast that we've got because we've talked a lot about making lawn care packages. And so that's what this is all about today. We've got Ian from the Lawn Shed. He's a turf pro. We're going to talk about his history in a second, but I'm glad to have him on. He's a wealth full of knowledge. That's not even how you say it. A wealth full of knowledge. What am I trying to say there, Ian?
A wealth of knowledge?
Yes. He's full of knowledge. He has a wealth of knowledge. And I think the challenge with this is to keep this a bit lower than maybe 6.5 hours if we're talking about turf, hey?
I do like to talk about grass, that's for sure.
Well, that's why we got you on. So let's start very quickly. The Lawn Shed, they're a sponsor of the podcast, and we're very glad to have them as a sponsor of the podcast. So as soon as you guys came on, I had people already asking about how do you do turf care programs and like complete programs and annual things that, you know, for clients or just for yourself. And as soon as we came, I was like, man, we've got to do this podcast because the Lawn Shed is providing all the products that I've been using for, 3 or so years for doing exactly this. And your background is perfect with all this sort of stuff. So tell us what you do now, and then tell us briefly what your background was getting into this and, the years working on golf courses and things like that.
Yeah, so currently obviously working for the Lawn Shed, which is sort of home retail, and now we've moved into the Lawn Shed trade in the last couple of weeks. We're an offshoot of Living Turf. Living Turf obviously providing products to professional stadiums, golf courses, councils around Australia. So doing a great job with that. But, the Lawn Shed is trying to fill that gap for home retailers, home gardeners and landscape contractors that were looking for, some better products and really looking to up their game. And we're sort of looking to help them grow their businesses and improve their lawns and things like that. You're asking me to toot my own horn about my background. So I probably started getting into lawn care and garden maintenance and things like that. My father owned a Jim's Mowing back when I was
really? That's fascinating.
Yeah. That's not on the LinkedIn profile, is it? I probably started mowing lawns when I was about 12. Wanted to get into golf course architecture, so signed up to do the greenkeeping path into golf course architecture, but was a golfer myself and just loved that feeling of presenting this a sports turf surface, and the feedback from members and just being involved in what's a really fantastic industry to be involved in. Lots of supportive people and things like that. So did that for many years, was assistant at Manly Golf Club during redevelopment and things like that. Was superintendent at Penrith Golf Club for a couple of years. Very hot weather, very difficult conditions to grow cool season grasses like bent grass on golf greens. Eventually, I got a master's degree in turf management. So I thought, might put that to a bit more scientific use and started working in product development across a few different brands. And then sort of about 2 years ago, I was asked to come join Living Turf and help them launch his business.
So that's always like full circle. You started off as in helping out with the gyms mowing around, the local contractor scene, went out to golf courses, ended up making products to help people back in the local lawn contractor scene again. So
yeah, it is in a way a full circle, and it's certainly in the last probably 5 to 10 years, things like Lenny Lawler's stuff with Australian Lawn Fanatics, and just the passion in this industry is sort of like, it's pretty cool to be a part of, to be honest.
Yeah, I found it fascinating because I started the business and I was gardening well before those pages came about, right? And it's interesting because what we're talking about here with a lawn care package, it was so hard back in the day to talk to clients about anything technical. And I didn't know everything technical either, right? I learned a lot of my stuff online, but you were starting from, I guess, the ground floor to be like, you need to water regularly. You need to, like, there's so many things to explain, whereas it's quite interesting because so many people go on these web pages now that I guess the general understanding about lawn might be, 1 or 2 steps beyond that, where it was a couple of years ago. And I think it opens up, interestingly enough, people sort of get an understanding, although they don't know the specifics. They're like, I know that watering's not enough, or I know that, mowing, I've got to do some more than that. And so those questions go in the back of their mind, and then they start asking contractors. And I wonder, back when you were 12, you said mowing lawns, I don't know, did you see people ask for programs, or did you see people wanting that side of things, or was it just like mow the lawns, get out of here,
Oh, look, it was mainly just mowing and trimming back then, hedging and things like that, the odd weed spray and things like that. That was probably the extent of the stuff that my father did. Certainly these groups are being fantastic for the knowledge base of the average consumer and, landscape contractors. It's like we've found each other. It's a group of people that have found each other, and, being able to share the knowledge they do have, and being able to get, really good access to information from other people that have it.
Yeah. And that's, I saw a post the other day as well about this industry, like how, I don't know, is it like this in the golf course industry where the superintendents and just the greenskeepers between different golf clubs are so happy to help, or is there a real competition? Because in the contractor scene, there seems to be, like just recently, because it wasn't like this when I started, right? But in the last 4 years, all of a sudden, everybody sort of feels like they're on the same team, even if you're working in the same areas. Like, you want to help each other, you want to grow, because it's like the rising water lifts all the ships. Has that been happening in golf course too?
Yeah, definitely been the case for a long time, particularly between superintendents. Look, I run a page called Turf Management Australia, which is close to 4,000 greenkeepers around Australia. And, we have things like the Australian Sports Turf Management Association, where, they have conferences and things like that, and they all get together. There's it's quite common, during renovations when you're coring greens and you're having to pick up all the cores and things like that, and you're needing different types of machinery and things like that. It's not uncommon from one golf course down the road to share machinery or share staff or things like that during peak periods. You have some of these big tournaments like the Australian Open and things like that. It's not uncommon for golf courses around Sydney or around Melbourne, wherever the event's being held, to jump in and help out, whether, even though they're 3 a.m. starts and things like that. Greenkeepers love that sort of stuff, and, being able to prepare things for a tournament, there's so much experience, and being able to, share staff and things like that, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something special about working outside, or, that creates that more, there's not that fierce rivalry. I don't know what it is, but there does seem to be some healthy competition and like respect, and obviously there's always jerks in every industry, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, look, like I said, they're positive people in the greenkeeping industry. Like I said, they're all friends, and it's fantastic industry to work in, really.
So let's get into actually making a program. So what we're going to do, people, I'm going to give you a bit of an outline. I'm going to talk about, I guess, about 5 or 6 different aspects of a program. And we'll start with what Ian's thinking about overarching before he gets into anything else specific. But you've got your mowing, which I think most of you will have down pat. You'll understand how to mow a lawn and the frequencies and things like that. So we're not going to touch on that too much. But we're going to talk about nutrition and soil, water requirements, what's needed, which is just related so much to soil as well. Weed control programs, pest control programs, disease control programs, and how to do those things to get an idea around how do you make something that over the course of a year is going to be successful. And I've found as well personally that this is where the industry, at least for me, working in this industry has become the most fun. Because when you just mow a lawn, you mow the lawn, you turn around, it looks better, and then you walk away and however long it is before you come back. When you come back, it looks worse. Whereas when you start doing product applications, when you see a disease and you can put a fungicide out and control the disease and maybe change how they're doing their watering to stop it from coming back, or when you start doing a nutrition program, you can do these things, come back in a month or come back in however long it is, and things are looking better. And you get this real pride and satisfaction of doing that type of work. And you start looking forward to doing these clients and working for these clients because hey, 3 weeks ago when I was there, I put out some fertilizer. Let's go check it again. I'd love to see how that's responded. And then the clients, they really enjoy what you're doing. They're so happy to have you there. They're like, oh, fantastic. It builds and it's this exciting thing. And also they're happy to pay, if you can find the right clients, they're happy to pay higher for these services. So it's a really important thing. I think that's why so many people ask about it. But then I also think the biggest inhibitor is the technical knowledge. And so, look, before we get into anything else, if anybody's got any questions, they can just email you, right, Ian, after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you help people all the time make programs specifically for the area they're in and the clients that they've got, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think to kick off, when you're designing a program for someone that reaches out, there's a lot of back and forth initially. Usually, someone will send an email, but I'll usually give them a call because there's a lot of information that you need to get from someone to create a program. And, you can do this by visiting the site, but if you don't have access to the site, that's why I'm often calling the contractors, and it comes down to a lot of things. So usually I start off with, what are the desires of the program? So look, are you looking to have a really dense, thick lawn? Are you looking to mow it with a cylinder mower? What type of grass you've got? All that sort of stuff. Are you just looking to get rid of weeds? There's so many different versions of a program you can have, from monthly applications to just doing a weed killing, June, July. A spring fertilizer. There's so many different variants. I've had customers that want to be applying, sort of fortnightly. Others that want to apply monthly. Some that want to apply granulars. Some that want to apply liquids. People that want to cut and apply straight away after, which makes complete sense when you're already there at site. So you've got to think about what products won't burn straight after a cut. So there's quite a lot of variables that go into designing a program, and then you sort of start to work from what the customer wants from their lawn. You start to work up to, what are the known issues that are in a lawn. So one of the good things you can do, identifying weeds and things like that. Something like nutgrass loves wet, compacted lawns. So where the water's not draining through that surface, that's a clear indicator of an issue with sort of water infiltration. Other broadleaf weeds and things like that can be indicators, doing soil tests, pH. But again, even soil tests comes back to the desirability. How much does this customer want to spend on their lawn? Because once you sort of start going down that path, it's the ideal and the best scientific method. But are you going to be able to on-charge that to a customer, for example, or are you going to get enough value out of it now?
And that's the thing that.
So if you've got a healthy lawn that you're looking to maintain, then that may not be as important as a lawn that's completely terrible and you've got to start from scratch. There's obviously an issue there, and identifying that issue before you start is a really good place to start.
Well, what I was going to touch on there is the challenge that a contractor has that a golf course or a stadium or what it doesn't have is that you're not there all the time. And so if you're, let's say equal area, right? You're doing a school, right? And so the standard of the school is probably not going to be the same as the standard of it's almost certainly not going to be the same as the standard of an actual playing surface, right? But if you're only there once every fortnight, what you're talking about with, you've got budget constraints. You've got to, try and apply when you're already there so you can save on travel time. And there's all these different things that I've found, at least when I go listen to long form podcasts, they're usually American and they're usually talking about like fescue or rye or Kentucky blue or something like that, which is completely irrelevant for 90-something% of Australia. And then also, you might find a heap of really good golf course podcasts or greenskeeper podcasts or things like that where they talk about their sort of stuff. But their standard is way higher than what we're trying to achieve. And so the way that they're doing it would be just way too expensive because they're there every day and this guy's mowing the lawn and that guy's doing this. And, it's just a completely different world. And that's why, making a podcast like this, that's like targeted to a contractor, this is going to be really helpful for a bunch of people. And the other thing as well, I think might be interesting is it might be interesting to talk about this podcast. We didn't mention this before, but it's come out now to talk about maybe 3 different tiers of expense or 3 different tiers of service, like a very low, simple, basic, tick the boxes that I said are the most essential, but not cover everything. Something in the middle that's both bang for buck and covers most things, and something where it's like if money's not an issue, and the client just has, a huge desire for an immaculate lawn, it might be good to talk about that stuff. So let's start with the very basic mowing. What would be your recommendations for mowing, Ian? You've got contractors out there who most of them are probably using a 21-inch walk behind. They might have a stand-on mower, a ride-on mower. Most over east don't have a cylinder. Most in WA probably do. What would you be thinking of with mowing before you start any of these programs?
Look, I think look around mowing and things like that. There's not a lot. It's not overly complex. 1/3 rule. I think everyone knows the 1/3 rule. So you're not taking too much off. So that's something to take into account when you're looking at fertilizer sources like your nitrogen release curve. So what that means is how fast your nitrogen is readily available, which is probably your main producer of your leaf growth. So, look, if you're wanting to mow regularly, then something like that, a more readily available nitrogen source is fine. If you're looking to mow 2 to 4 weekly, controlled release nitrogen, maybe even some growth regulator like Primo Max, those things tend to come into account.
It's pretty common for clients to ask for a 4 weekly mowing cycle and then also be like, what can you do to help my lawns look good? And it's like, I don't know, because a lot of people, we did it for a long time. In winter, 4 weekly, sure. But in the growing season, it's so hard to, like, even without fertilizer, to keep a nice, consistent mow on it without just hacking it back, sometimes. What's it like over where you are with, like, frequencies? What would you expect to be a good frequency?
Yeah, it depends on the grass type, as you said. Like, over here in the east, in Sydney, we're predominantly kikuyu and buffalo, few blue cooch lawns around and things like that. So blue cooch was obviously a go back in the 60s, and still a few red brick homes running the blue cooch type lawns. Look, it's too cold for blue cooch, and during summer you could get away with mowing it every 4 weeks, to be honest. Kikuyu, any sort of rain, and you need to mow that weekly, maybe twice a week. It's just such an aggressive grass. I've heard people say, you don't have good kikuyu unless you use growth regulator. And, there's probably some truth to that. Some people even call it a weed over in Sydney. Look, buffalo, if you're mowing at a higher height, you'd be struggling to get 4 weeks if you've got healthy grass with, decent irrigation or rainfall. 2 weeks, probably a maximum. And, that's still cutting pretty high.
And so let's talk about growth regulator then, because I don't think many people are using this in the industry, and I think it's underutilized in the industry because it really doesn't take that long to apply, and the amount it would save in the following sort of 3 to 6 weeks, however long it lasts, is well above and beyond, the application time. So how does plant growth regulator work, and how would you sort of plan that if you're doing a mowing cycle? Let's say we throw out the 4 weeklies and we say, look, 4 weekly, you're asking for trouble. It's probably not worth making a program if they're trying to save money on their frequency of cut. It's probably not the right mindset. But how would you use if we're talking fortnightly or weekly programs, mowing programs through the years, how would you use plant growth regulator, and where would it be best for a contractor to think about it?
Yeah, look, you're definitely right. If someone is stretching it out to 4 weeks, a program's probably not the fit for them. Maybe some weed control and maybe something in spring, a bit of a spring mix for insects and things like that might be a good upsell for them. Using growth regulators, look, they need to be used quite regularly. You certainly won't get 6 weeks out of them, depending on weather. You can sort of go 2 to 4 weeks in some really warmer areas. They work around sort of what they call 200 growing degree days. So that's probably a bit of a complex topic, but if you're interested, definitely look into that term. I'd be using...
What that basically means is that the hotter the temperature, the shorter it lasts. So, I mean, you wouldn't want to apply, you wouldn't apply it when it was too cold anyway, because your lawn's not really growing to start with. But in the middle of summer, it's not like a fertilizer or other products where it's like, oh, we know this lasts 4 to 5 weeks every single time you apply it. It's a bit different depending on the temperature, right?
Yeah, it's definitely depending on temperatures and things like that. And what I've experienced speaking with contractors and things like that have used Primo Max is one of their concerns is when the Primo Max is an example of a plant growth regulator. And when that wears off, because of the way it works, is it's a gibberellic acid inhibitor, which prevents cell division, basically. So once that wears off, the cell divides, which basically means the lawn grows very, very quickly overnight, sort of thing. So that does pose a bit of an issue if you're not there regularly and applying regularly. So like you said, it's around those 1 to 2 week, mowing jobs that you're doing where you can apply that product. Now, this is more where you're looking for a lawn that is low cut, high density, sort of looking to improve it that way.
So would you, if we're going to 3 tiers, would you put, it seems to me that like the top tier would be sort of a weekly service, your middle tier and your bottom tier more probably around the fortnightly. You might even go multiple times a week at certain times of the year for your top service if money's not an issue. Where would you put Primo Max? Where would you put a growth regulator?
I'd only put it in the top tier, to be honest.
Yeah. I agree.
Regular access, yeah.
We would use it. I think it's really creative to use it around Christmas or if you're ever going to go on a holiday, because it probably will last the amount of time you're off. And you do get quite a big kick up, especially I found with like a kikuyu or something like that, where it's like, it's almost like, you're holding in you need to go have a whiz, go to the toilet, and you're holding it in and you're really busting, It's like the plant is busting to grow. It really wants to grow. It just can't. And then all of a sudden when it wears off, bam, it's gone. It's shooting up. And so if you've got clients who, you really would have cut them, you're gonna cut them one week before Christmas and not be back until early Jan, it's probably good to apply it across everybody if you're trying to, save yourself a bit of phone calls and people getting, a bit upset that you're not there. So that's a good thing.
But the only other time I'd probably use it is we sort of had some weather conditions last sort of growing season where it was conducive to sort of very upright growth, and Primo Max, the growth regulators, would have really assisted with that. We kind of had a lot of rainfall, so the grass wanted to grow, and because we had a lot of cloud cover, I mean, I'm talking East Coast here, I should explain. Because we had a lot of cloud cover, what happens with the grass is it wants to grow to sunlight, so it's trying to grow upright. So we had so much upright growth that basically every time you went to mow, you'd be scalping the lawn. Challenging conditions, and obviously, people that would normally be on 2-3 weekly mows were coming down to 1. Kikuyu was unmanageable in some sort of sporting grounds and things like that. We sort of saw on our East Coast. Any areas that weren't treated with a growth regulator, the councils couldn't get on to mow them. Grass was getting sort of knee high. And then obviously it crowds the surface as well. And so that was so wet that, you couldn't get a mower onto it to mow it. And, even the local school, I was up there with a push mower trying to mow some of the sporting grounds because they couldn't get a ride onto it.
So, the ride's too heavy, yeah.
E2, yeah, they did try, got bogged.
Well, the other thing we should talk about with mowing is so one thing that we do, right? So we've got 4 different levels of packages, and we include a service called grooming, which, I mean, people across the country, they got different words for this, but the way I use it is you've got vertimowing, which is like your full rip it out, scalp it down to basically dirt service. And then we've got grooming, which we just we use that as like a bit of a tickle, to tickle things, to thin it out a little bit. And then you might do a bit of a scalp. So there might be a bit of green left on there, but it's common for most of our packages, except for our most basic one, to have some sort of height reset, whether that be a scalp down. And usually the way that we would do that is in spring, maybe, as the lawn's just starting to grow again, it's coming out of winter, to scalp it down to maybe, 2/3 of your desired height. So if you want to cut it at 2 centimeters, you'd cut it down to maybe, 1 to 1.5, somewhere in that ballpark. And so that you've gotten rid of some of the sort of thatchy, spongy growth on top at least, and then you're getting some new green stuff coming through. Is that the same over east? Like, is that something that would be worth at least? Because I know that if you know that you should do that in your head and you don't say it to the client, you're going to be in trouble, because they're going to be, what the heck have you done to my lawn? But it serves a purpose, right?
Yeah, look, there's definitely some, I think, confusion around the terminology around sort of verticutting and scarifying and all that sort of stuff. And, pretty much the terminology you use there, I would definitely agree with. Definitely, look, once you come out of winter, you've got a lot of old leaf that is sort of, I guess, a little bit hard underfoot and a little bit scaly. You've got some old dead leaf that might be sitting there as well. So while you're not removing thatch, which is a lot lower underneath the runners and things like that, you're taking off all that old leaf and you're putting a fertilizer out and you're putting on nice, flush, soft, new dark green leaf that is just so much better to walk on and play soccer on with the kids, or whatever you're doing with the kids. Definitely a height reset. Now, I see a lot of variance in when you can go and when you can start that. Now, look, golf course background, obviously we want fast turnaround. Nobody wants to be playing scalped fairways. Obviously you wouldn't scalp a green, but unless you're doing a bowling green, you wouldn't, you'd want a fast turnaround. So something like Cooch in Sydney, we used to use Melbourne Cup Day. You wouldn't do it before Melbourne Cup Day. So as a reminder, but, in Queensland, that's completely different. If you're happy for a 4-week turnaround, then, you can do it earlier. Depends on the amount of nitrogen in the soil. It depends on some of the new Cooch hybrids, they if you're putting a lot of nitrogen into them, they do need a regular sort of scalp and things like that. So, and they bounce back very quickly. You can see some of the results that people are getting within a week of scalping, getting it back, and you can look at that nice, flush new growth. And sometimes it's good as well, because a lot of people will leave the grass a little bit longer in winter. So you've got extra leaf length, so more ability to absorb chlorophyll. More chlorophyll, more ability to absorb sunlight, so to speak. So the plant can be a little bit healthier by being a little bit longer. And, it also shades the ground, so it can help prevent, sort of weed emergence and weed size and things like that. So, resetting it down to a nice lower height is a good option as well.
I do find it's really common. I made this mistake so much early on. I didn't realize how important that high reset was, and I would have lawns that maybe after 2 years I might have been cutting them and say level 3 on the rotary, and then 2 years later they're level 6 because they've gotten just higher and higher and higher. And if you had just gone from, say, your level 3 down to your level 2 every year, it would have stayed at a level 3. I'm talking about in a very rudimentary sense for a rotor mower. But the way that we've done it, maybe in a contractor sense, this makes sense for budgets as well, is if you're not doing a full vertimo and you're just doing a scalp, if you do it when it first starts growing again, that's obviously different around the country. we would basically take 2 cuts and put them into one. So we're not charging any extra, but it does take about twice as long for the lawn to recover. And so we add a groom, which gets the lateral stuff, and you basically do 2 scalp mows in different directions. You've cut it down, and it's good enough, right? It's not as good as of a full vertimo service, but for a client who doesn't have insanely high expectations, someone who's just wanting it green and looking pretty good, and really it doesn't cost the client that much extra, whereas a full vertimowing service and all the waste. And when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about lawns that are already 10 centimeters tall. They're probably 5 centimeters tall. You want to cut them down a bit lower. It's quite a reasonable cost for the client, and it's sort of like a poor man's vertimowing service. Eventually, you're going to need a full one, but it covers you for a while.
Yeah, well, vertimowing obviously offers a little bit more because you got the cylinder the rotary blades going around, the vertimo's cutting in, and so all those sort of leaf, you can go over, say, a buffalo lawn, and you might have mown it quite low, but you've got a leaf that's
so
10 centimeters long because it's just lying down and the rotary hasn't picked it up. So that's where the verticutter comes in. The other thing that verticutter does is it will sort of like tease up that little bit of thatch that's sort of or like a mat sitting on top. And it also cuts the runners. So if you've got like a stoloniferous grass or something that runs across the top, it will cut them, and then it can regrow from every internode. So you can actually make your lawn denser by cutting these because you're creating all these new growing points around the lawn.
Yeah. And so this ties in so well then with nutrition, right? Because a lot of people, the mistake they made is they go through winter, it's a little bit higher, they don't do a scalp, and then they chuck on a urea or a massively high nitrogen fertilizer, which just causes a huge amount of growth, beautiful color from that growth. And then what happens is they go cut it, and they're sort of scalping into that thatchy layer that they haven't removed in the height reset or in a vertimowing surface. And so there's always this challenge. I had this with a client actually recently before winter. They went to the shops and they put fertilizer on their own lawn, and they just way overdid it. And so it was beautiful, right? But it was just, we couldn't cut it anymore at a manageable height. And so we just had a conversation with them, and I don't think they took it. They got a little bit, not offended, but they just, thought we're trying to make money out of them, I think, instead of actually hearing it from a like, hey, we're trying to help you perspective. But it's super common that people do that. So let's get into a whole nutrition thing. You got liquid, you got granule, you got so many different options, water soluble. Some people say this is great. Some people that say that is great. How about we go through the seasons? We've just talked about as if we're starting in spring. We're about to do that. Let's go through, and what would you be thinking about each season? So we've come out, we've done our little scalp. What are you now thinking about nutrition-wise, Ian? What would be a great way for our contractors to think about it there?
Yeah, so look, usually I plan out the whole year, but obviously there are slight variances depending on rainfall and things like that. The first thing I usually work on is our nitrogen requirement. So depending on your grass, you're going to have different nitrogen requirements. So something like some of the new hybrid couches, it's very low. It's sort of 1.5 kilos of nitrogen per 100 square meters per year. Now, you don't want to be putting that all on during summer, obviously, because the grass is naturally growing. But you do need to have some sort of feed because it is growing and it is hungry. So it does need some fertilizer. When it comes to, and then other grasses are more sort of something like, the older hybrid couches, not as green during summer. And so if you're really chasing that Instagram photo or things like that, then you do need to actually increase the nitrogen and things like that in that lawn type. Now, in terms of liquid and granular, generally I tend to work on 3 applications of granular throughout the year and then supplement it with liquids. The reason for that is you're going to have a high requirement of nitrogen in the spring period, and then I also put a lot on in autumn to try to get the plant, because the plants, the grass is generally sucking it in and putting it into the roots, and it'll actually start using that next spring. So you can actually have an earlier spring green up by fertilizing in autumn. You can continue your growing season. So whether that's more mowing or just getting better density and a healthier turf through the winter period and dealing with stresses like, well, first of all, not growing, kids playing soccer on it, frost and all that sort of stuff. So going back to the benefits of granular and liquid, granular, if you're putting on 2 kilos of a granular fertilizer, for example,
per 100 square meters.
100 square meters, yeah. So let's just talk round figures, and then it's 20%. The NPK ratio is 20:0:0, for example. You're looking at 20%. So you're looking at 400 grams of nitrogen per 100 square meters. Now that's kind of where you need to be at to sort of get the grass growing. Now, if you think of some of the liquids that are sort of 500 mils and they might be 10% nitrogen, you're looking at 50 grams of nitrogen. So significantly less. So you need to be sort of giving it that boost and that feed. And look, the amount of nitrogen that your lawn needs and things like that will depend on your soil. I've seen some very, very good, healthy soils that require very little nitrogen and, supplemental fertilizer throughout the year. Then you see something like that's heavy sand, and you probably want to be actually moving away from granulars and putting more foliar feed on so that it's absorbed through the leaf rather than leached through the sandy soil. So a bit of a consideration around soil types there. You've got to consider pHs and all that sort of stuff as well.
So the starter is that with the granular fertilizer, you're getting just way more product out there, right? And it's just a weight thing, and people understand this. Like, although you might be putting, let's say, 6 liters of water out or 5 liters of water out with a liquid fertilizer, the water it's just water. It's just a carrier, right? You actually only might have 200, 500, whatever mil of actual fertilizer in that water. And whereas the granule in a fertilizer like blend, you're putting kilos out, right? And it lasts, well, depending on which type of fertilizer you've got, but the majority of them that are designed for lawns will last, would you say 6-8 weeks, maybe a little bit longer?
Yeah, it depends on the soil type. Like, obviously there's a bit of a guide on most of the packs will tell you sort of, 6 to 8 weeks. Some will last up to 10 to 12. That's sort of stretching it though. When they say 12 weeks, you're probably supplementing with a liquid towards the end of that. And I generally recommend if something says 6 to 8 weeks, that at 6 weeks you start doing a bit of foliar feeding just to help it. As you said, there's a lot more bulk in the granular fertilizer. There's a little bit more technology in granular fertilizer as well, because obviously a liquid needs to be stabilized in a bottle and then put out. Whereas granulars, you can have different granulars for different purposes and things like that. So there's a little bit more technology in there.
How long would a liquid fertilizer generally last?
Depends on the products. You can get ones with sort of a methylene urea-based nitrogen, which can last sort of a lot longer, whereas other ones are sort of based on other forms of urea and being more readily absorbed. It depends on the liquid. So some of the more organic ones are a little bit slower, and they're more maintenance fertilizer. So you wouldn't put them on when you've run out of fertilizer. When your lawn's when the lawn's yellow and things like that. Generally give it a boost with granular and then slip into a liquid maintenance fertilizer. So liquids are more about maintenance than recovery for most of the time.
So, and let's talk about some specific products. I'm on the Lawn Shed website now. So you've got Match Play Spring Start, which I would assume does what the name says, right? Like if you're coming into spring, use that. Is that what it's trying to say?
Yeah, look, we've got a couple of different ones on there. Probably if we cover the 3 granulars, like Match Play Origin is more readily available. Spring Start is a smaller prill, better technology, and correct, you're right, it does work in spring. You can generally use that throughout the year though. It's more that when we say Spring Start, we're talking it's a more complete product. And then the last one on there is the soluble, the high-end one, which is a soluble one, but that's also got some really good technology in it as well.
What does it mean when a fertilizer is soluble? Because I see that on a lot of different packages, and I don't know if everybody knows what they're trying to say.
Yeah, so this one is a crystalline product, which basically means you put it in a bucket, add some water, and it dissolves, and then you can spray it out that way.
And how would that compare to like a normal liquid fertilizer where it's already liquid?
Depends on the liquid. Some of the liquids would be fairly similar. This one is probably it's easier to carry around and things like that. Some people just prefer soluble that they can mix up. You can put a bag in a 300-liter tank and pump off the back of your ute type thing, as opposed to pouring in sort of I guess 60 liters worth of liquid fertilizer. So it would depend. There's looking at the NPK, the technology,
sure.
product, things like that.
It's basically, so if you've got really large areas or you don't have a lot of storage in your ute, you can store a lot more nutritional content by not having the water carrier with it as well. So I guess a 20-liter, drum of liquid fertilizer, if you don't have space for that, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but I'm making up these numbers. You might be able to get the same nutrition out of a 5-kilogram bag of water soluble. It'd be something like that, right?
Look, it depends on the product. So some liquids are very highly loaded, and they're sort of more complete products. We've sort of got the Lawn Play Curator, which is an 1828. It's not that far away from the high end product, but it's still less nitrogen and things like that. So yeah, look, the soluble is probably more a delivery method, and it is a methylene urea in that one. So a little bit slower release nitrogen as well.
So if we're going to start with, we're coming into spring, what products would you be recommending for this low, high? Let's say, talking through spring, you've got, and by the way, people, while this is conversational, you can get some real hard data by emailing Ian and actually get him to write, with you an actual program. But we've got September, October, November. We've got our low end. What sort of products would you be using for the low end client? They just want the cheapest thing, something that's going to give them a result, but not too expensive. What would you be using for them?
Yeah. So I guess the way I would start, like you kind of want to start, if you want to get them onto a program in spring, you kind of want to get them treating weeds. That's probably where I would start, because when you look at sort of, if you go back into my product development background, there's not a lot of people out there that actually use products. It's sort of about 1 in 4 people are using products on their lawn. The sort of, and most people are mowing, but there's a lot of people out there that don't trim edges and things like that. So you're up against it. There's a bit of a challenge to convince people to get onto a program. So starting with weed killing is definitely where you want to go, because most people find them unsightly. They grow faster than the grass. That's definitely where I would start. So using a product to kill the weeds is a great start. And then moving on to a granular fertilizer, because after weeds, next desire is a nice green healthy lawn. So you can knock out the weeds with Stadium, and then you can move to a granular fertilizer like Match Play Origin just to kickstart it. So that's kind of like your low budget. From there, you'd probably move up. Look, Spring Start is a great product, and it per 100 square meters, it's only a few dollars extra. Definitely recommend that. It's a very small prill, so if you've got customers that are conscious about dogs and children, it does filter down really nicely into sort of, it's 100 SGN, so 1 mil prill, so that'll filter down nicely into your Buffalo, Kikuyu, and obviously you water it in on your cylinder cut lawns. After fertilizer, you're probably looking at insecticide, because you want to, for a couple of reasons. One, you want to protect the lawn. Two, if there's no lawn there because the grubs have eaten it, you're not mowing. So definitely an investment there. The Celeprone is what I recommend there. It's very broad spectrum, low toxicity and things like that. So good product to use for the household and things like that. Beyond that, depending on your location, there'd be things to start considering in your lawn type. probably a prodiamine-based pre-emergent like Spartan or Barricade would be the next step. So especially moving into spring, some areas are more prone to it than others, but summergrass, crowsfoot, crabgrass are very common. And once they're there, they're a lot more difficult to kill because of the type of herbicide you need, and the stuff that you're using is sort of around that Schedule 6, Schedule 7. So not the nicest stuff to be using around homeowners.
So that's a sort of a spring summary. So your low end, you've got basically just knock out the weeds that are already there from winter and put down a granule fertilizer, mow regularly, and you'll get some pretty good results, far better than what you get just from mowing. On the middle,
say a wetting agent as well.
A wetting agent. Well, we'll talk about the wetting agents and the weeds and stuff like that in more detail. So we're just touching on this, as briefly as possible, because otherwise it is going to be 6 hours long. This podcast if we touch everything as thoroughly as we need to. But let's stay on the nutrients for a bit, and let's do a whole quick summary and move on from nutrients. So you've got your granules, the longer lasting liquids, a bit short acting, and it's hard to do a whole program just based on liquids, just purely from the amount of applications you would need to do. So would you be using your spring start through most of the year? Would you change anything depending on the season, or is that just a really good all-rounder and you can complement that with liquid fertilizers?
Yeah, look, I mean, it depends. If you're going down the soil test pathway and you're looking at that, then spring start may not be the best option for you. But if you're looking for a general all-purpose and the lawn's in reasonable condition already, look, spring start 3 times a year, so spring, summer, autumn, forms a really good basis for a program.
And what would you use? What product would you use if you've got a lawn that has been really neglected coming out of winter? It needs a lot of love. People will be having this problem right now. What product would you be using for that?
Yeah, so that's where I'd be using the Max Play Origin, because the nitrogen release curve is a lot steeper. So it doesn't last as long, but it'll get that fertilizer out there. It'll get that kickstart. Obviously wait till things are actively growing and you can really kickstart it with that Origin, and then review it in sort of 8 weeks' time and go, do I need to hit this again with another granular? Like how bad is this lawn? Do you need to hit it again? But as well, if you've got a terrible lawn coming out of winter, have a look at why it's terrible. I've had customers talk to me about, their lawn, and you look at it and you go, oh, I can't grow grass in the shade. Maybe planting a garden bed along that fence might be a better option for you, low-lying, sort of garden bed. There's areas where you just can't grow grass. So, look at soils and things like that. If you don't get a burst from that first fertilizer, that's where it's definitely something you should look into for like soil testing. Like if you're not getting an uptake from fertilizer in general, there's something wrong.
Right, interesting. What would you change from those, like going through the seasons? You're going into the heat, you're going into autumn, going into winter. Is there anything else people should look at? And I guess it's hard to summarize an entire year of nutritional programming in 45 characters or whatever we're asking you to do. But what are the things that people should be planning for and looking out for as the summer comes in and the different temperature changes?
Yeah, look, from a nutritional perspective, when you got more active growth, like it's common belief that you don't put fertilizer out, but your lawn is actively growing. It does need it needs nutrients. That's the reality of it. It's like a bit like a teenager who needs a lot of feed, a lot to eat. You actually need like a good amount of food to eat and things like that. So, you're changing to a slower release fertilizer during that peak period, so you don't get peaks and troughs of growth. So you can be applying less regularly, so you get more consistent growth without going into too much detail of it. Looking at putting things like kelps and things like that out that can sort of help reduce stress on the plant. Vitalize is a fantastic product that we've got that uses a lot of the natural processes within a plant to protect it against heat and things like that. Very, very cool product, that one. Turf managers love that one. Things like that is probably what you do. I see a lot of people applying iron around Christmas time and things like that to impress their neighbours and friends and things like that. So, something like that's a good option as well.
So, and then the last thing before we move on from nutrition is I think for a lot of guys, guys and girls out there doing the service, they want something. So you've got your match play origin to give something a kick up, like a real lift them up. You've got your spring start, which is more of an all-rounder, right? What product, just to keep things as simple as possible, you've mentioned a few different liquid ones. Which liquid one would complement those two the best? Or, in most cases, obviously you've got different climates, you got different soil types, but because you're mentioning iron there, because it sounds like those, if you had a liquid and you had your two granule fertilizers with you ready to go, you can chuck down those things and solve maybe the 80-20 rule. You're solving most of the problems with the fewest number of products.
Yeah. Look, I mean, a lot of the liquids you'd probably mix a few together. If you're putting me on the spot and I got to pick one, I'd probably pick like the Match Play Vitalize. Like it's got all the organic acids, it's got the biology and things like that can help your soil, chelate your nutrients, all that sort of stuff, as well as boosting those things within the plant. So, especially seeing how we're going into this period where it looks like it's going to be a very dry summer for most of Australia, if not all of it. That's something that will help with those plant stresses.
So if you want more information, email Ian, because we can't spend 6 hours doing all this sort of stuff. I do feel like there's about 75 products we haven't talked about. And one thing I will say as well, people, and this is Luke talking. When we used to go to Bunnings back in the day, like I understand what it's like because Bunnings is just available and it's just there. But what you'll often find is that the products there, they may, there's good things there, there's bad things there, but it's often that the sizing is wrong and, you end up spending a lot of money for a small amount of product, or it might not be they might not have exactly what you want in stock. It's so much better and I've been doing this for years. This is not just saying this because, Ian's in front of us on the camera right now, but being proactive and having products ready to go. I mean, this time it saves you just to order like a bunch of bags of fertilizer and have them at your house or have them, have a couple on the ute ready to go when they're needed. The amount of time that saves you driving back and forth, and all the economies of scale, like there's benefits to that. So I'll be saying as well, that's why I said like there's bang for buck things. If you have them on your ute, you have them in your van or whatever you're using, it is really helpful for the average contractor to do that. Let's go on to weed control, because we touched on this briefly, and some people, they probably got lost, right? But he talked about a stadium. He talked about pre-emergence like barricade. Let's start at the ground level, right? Mm-hmm. Some people on here, and we're not going to embarrass them, but maybe they should. We're not angry at them. We're just disappointed, right? They're still using weed and feed bottles. Not very many. I think most people have moved on from it. But what's the problem with weed and feed? And I don't mean as a specific brand name. Any type of hose-on applicator, right? I mean, there's a few in my mind. But what's the difference that you're getting with? And it doesn't matter about the brand. We're not even talking about different, things you could get from all sorts of shops. The difference between just applying a concentrate through a sprayer and applying something could be exactly the same active through a hose-on applicator, there's a huge jump, right?
Yeah, look, there's a bit of a difference. I often relate some of those products to, the 2-in-1 shampoo versus the one that my missus uses. It does some, it does some of the work, and some of them are better than others, and probably won't go into that too much, so I don't get into too much trouble. But look, when you talk about Stadium, so I use Stadium as an example, it has, 3 actives. So some of those aren't available at your local hardware stores. And they're very effective actives, and they're very systemic actives. And they work across a very broad range of weeds. What I've seen in a trend, particularly in Sydney, now I don't know if that's Australia-wide, but I'm seeing a lot more smaller leafed weeds. And I attribute that a little bit to some of the hose-ons, because the hose-ons do, broadly speaking, put out a larger droplet size and a higher volume of water. And so the ability of that larger droplet to stick to smaller leafed weeds can be a bit of an issue. Things like oxalis have become very common in gardens, and the ability to control them is something that I've seen a lot of customers come through to me asking about. So something like, bow and arrow, stadium, same sort of active ingredients. They're very cheap. If you buy stadium 10 litre, it works out a little over $1 100 square meters. So it actually ends up cheaper than some of these products.
It's crazy.
Yeah, so crazy not to sort of be doing that for a customer when you think about how low cost that is. So when you're putting it out over a lawn, you can be using sort of 4 to 6 litres of water per 100 square metres. So putting it out with a lot lower volume of water, basically smaller droplet size, you're able to treat that weed specifically and, get really good results from it.
And the time to apply as well. So, I mean, we're talking about the cost. I mean, it might cost you, I don't know what it is, but if you're getting a larger quantity, it might be a couple of $100 or something like that. The herbicides vary. Like Lonro is $200 for 100 grams, but it's the same thing in that you're using, I think it's 1.5 grams per 100 square meters off the top of my head. Right? Yeah. It's something like that. It's such a small amount that the cost per application is just so cheap. And the time to apply, when you're only got to spray 4 litres or 6 litres or whatever your calibration is for 100 square meters compared to hose-on, right? So, I mean, hose-ons, they've got their place for sure. But, as a professional contractor, you're shooting yourself in the foot by not taking advantage of something that's going to be cheaper, quicker. And I think 99% of people do, get, for some reason, they sort of understand it, but they haven't quite, understood exactly why. What are the best, if you can just give us an overview, what are your 3 or 4 best products that you think people should be looking into, seeing if that's what's good for them in their condition? You mentioned Barricade and Spartan. You mentioned Stadium. Tell us about Barricade and Spartan to start with.
Yeah, look, Barricade and Spartan, was it? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Barricade and Spartan, yeah, sorry. So Barricade and Spartan both contain the active prodiamine, so they're a pre-emergent herbicide. So basically applying in late February, early March to prevent wintergrass. If you're in an area that gets wintergrass, there are areas up north that soil temperatures don't drop low enough to get wintergrass, but for most of Australia they do. And then you want to be applying again in sort of early to mid-September, again depending on rainfall and soil temperatures, to prevent crow's foot, crabgrass, and summergrass. Now, as a disclaimer, don't apply it to cool season grasses like rye and fescue and things like that. They're too similar, and you'll cause issues there, so don't do that. But that's on the label, obviously.
Yeah, and so in my opinion, if I was only ever going to use one herbicide, right, like that's what I would use, because you get about 6 months or so out of an application, and whilst it's not going to stop absolutely everything and control absolutely everything, it's just a much more effective bang for buck application than most, post-emergent sprays. So now, if you're going to the post-emergent world, what other products would you be using to complement with that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a couple others obviously out there in the market. My other go-to is probably something with an oxidizon active. Now we have a product called Oxstar that has that. So oxidizon is a slightly different pre-emergent. Doesn't last as long, so it's only there for 12 weeks, about 10 to 12 weeks. Generally coated with a fertilizer in the form of Oxstar. So what that's actually designed for is new turf. So if you're laying new turf and you put Barricade down,
Yeah.
It won't actually shoot. The roots won't actually take. That's just the way the herbicide works, that barrier. But if you lay new turf, then put the Oxstar over the top, you've got a couple of different benefits. So first of all, the fertilizer is designed specifically for establishing new turf. Like, it's a new turf starter fertilizer. It's high phosphorus level, to really establish those roots level. And then the herbicide goes in there and stops the roots coming up through it. So different technology, and very effective. Some people I see using it year round, but I think the NPK is designed for new turf. So unless you're using new turf, I'd probably move more towards the Barricade and a more more consistent granular fertilizer.
What about post-emergence then? So stadium, bow and arrow, we've mentioned that. What else? What other things on there would you be looking out for a contractor? And again, I think these are products, pre-emergence not so much, but post-emergence, if you can have them in your ute and in your van at all times, when it comes up, it gives you just, not in every case, because maybe it's too hot or maybe you've just mowed the lawn or whatever, but you have an opportunity to apply them. And that's when your service, it's just great money to earn doing it that way, because you don't have the travel time and it's really helpful for the client. So what would you be saying people should have on their ute at all times? So what's some good products there?
I think a stadium is something that you definitely want to be carrying through this sort of period of the year. I think a glyphosate-based herbicide for, the weeds in, pathways and things like that is often something, quick dollars sort of thing, quick turnaround and easy to get a customer to agree to. The more pre-emergent stuff, that's more program-based stuff. So probably a little bit more of a discussion with the customer, as opposed to sort of carrying those around. But again, you're sort of only carrying them for 2 parts of the year anyway. You want to be applying them at that time of the year. So it's not something, it's something you could have on the ute in February type thing and go, you remember how you got winter grass last year? We can prevent it, it only works out. So if you're preventing winter grass, it's only 10 mils per 100. I generally recommend the 20 to 25 mils per 100, just for coverage. But, it works out at a few dollars sort of per 100.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Especially if you're buying the bigger containers.
So could you give us, so we had a bit of a brief overview of a year of fertilizing. You were using your granules, you're topping up with some liquid stuff. And, over winter, actually, we didn't talk about fertilizer over winter, but would you be using the same sort of thing, granule and liquid over winter? Or would you be going more liquid? What would you be doing?
Move away from the granule. Microbes that sort of break that down tend to go to sleep once it sort of gets to that period. So your autumn granular is sort of your last one until spring. Then you're looking at a couple of different options. Usually iron is probably what most people use for greening up and keeping it there. If you're in sort of Queensland, you will need to sort of a little bit of nitrogen and a little bit of NPK continuing, because it will continue to tick over. Whereas down south, you probably don't need that. If you're dealing with tall fescues, you're probably not chasing the colour of green, so your iron, you probably won't need that. But Sydney-based kikuyu on clay, for example, just hates winter. Just goes so yellow. So you might be using something like your Lawn Play Enhance, which is nitrogen and iron, and then you might even be topping it up with a little bit of pigment like Lawn Play Verdant, just to sort of keep that colour going. So artificially creating that chlorophyll within the plant.
So that's a rough guide for a year, and it is so hard for you to answer this question because we're talking to people from Alice Springs and Perth and Tasmania and Townsville, and so you're covering so many different things. But you got that fertilizer thing. To recap what you've already said about weed control, you're talking February, March for a pre-emergent Spartan or Barricade. Now, my personal opinion is that if you guys are doing gardens, even though they're the same active ingredient, Barricade is registered to be used in gardens as well. And so just keep yourself above the line, because I don't think there's much difference in price per mil, right? Like they're quite similar from my memory.
Look,
I don't know if you
barricade comes in a 1 and a 5 litre. So if you're applying to lawns and gardens, if that's what you want to do, I'd sort of go up to that bigger size, especially in the contractor market.
I think
it's great for a homeowner. 500 mils treats 2,500 square meters at 20 mils. So you're going all right with that size. But once you start doing multiple lawns, that disappears pretty quickly.
Yeah, if you're going to buy liters and liters a year, you may as well just get a bigger container. But you also, even though it's the same active, you can legally put it in your garden beds as well. But with the so you've got February, roughly March, you're doing your pre-emergent, and then you mentioned around now you'd be putting out a stadium or a bow and arrow, and then maybe in mid-September you'd be doing another pre-emergent. Are there other times of years you should be looking out for different weeds, the different applications?
Look, the stadium and bow and arrow would probably be more April, May, June sort of thing. You do tend to see some broadleafs popping up around February, March. Around Easter, you start to get bindai and things like that. Again, depending on rainfall and soil temperatures, location, things like that. I guess, that's sort of where I'd be with that. So we'll have to. What was the question?
No, that's interesting because that does come back to climate as well. Because I used to start applying my broadleafs. So with like a pre-emergent, it's really good with grass weeds and maybe some of your broadleafs pop through. I used to be applying them in sort of late May, and I found that was a little bit too early because I still had some that maybe were quite small, covered by the lawn a little bit. Maybe just not quite getting that control. So I was actually finding that sort of July, like start of July, was pretty good time to be applying it. But I guess that's just climate, and that's the challenge that you've got talking broadly across the whole country. And I guess that's why people should email. I don't know how many times we've said that before, but So we were talking about across the year, what sort of products would you be at least having front of mind coming into autumn or coming into summer, or like what are good ones to have at least in the back of your head at very least?
Yeah, look, with those different weeds, different broadleafs germinate at different soil temperatures. So if you go out in March, that's fine, but you're only going to get a certain amount of them. In July, they've pretty much all germinated, but they haven't started to seed. So that's why June, July is like a really good time, depending on your location, to get out there and do something about them. Seasonal, wetting agents through summer are an absolute must. Depending on your soil, anyone who's got sand, like you guys in WA, you probably know more about wetting agents than the rest of the country put together, to be honest. Whereas, in sort of Sydney, some more organic soils and things like that, we're probably not using them definitely not as often as we should. Spring, getting a granular fert, getting that insecticide on is absolutely critical. And then sort of in autumn, getting some granular fert on to sort of extend the growing season and just make sure that it's there to spring start as well. Get that spring jump as well. So getting something on there as well. It's probably one of the more neglected ones. We sort of tend to do spring fertilizer, but not an autumn one. So look, and then your pre-emergence, spring and autumn, huge things to do.
Is there anything else about the weed stuff that comes to mind that we've missed, or should we move on to pest control, disease control, and see if we can?
In regards to weeds, probably the only thing I've missed is you do get some weeds that are difficult to kill. You do get some that sit outside, with something like stadium has got 3 different actives. So it is very broad spectrum, but there's always something that sits outside it. There's thousands of weeds out there. So, you obviously start by identifying that weed. And, if you've got to flick a photo through to me, that's fine. Do it. I'm happy to help out there and then recommend a product for it. So, you'll get 99% of your weeds with this stadium, and then you might find that there's the odd one there. If it's an odd one, just pull it out before it spreads, because otherwise you might be buying something very specific for that use. And, if you're having to buy a 10-litre drum for one lawn, it's a bit of a
Yeah.
so pull it out if it survives the spray. Things like onion weed, obviously you can't pull out. So onion weed and onion grass, very common over here in New South Wales, particularly in older lawns. Something like lawn row is very specific for that one. But yeah, I think that's it for weeds. I think we're good.
We're good. Well, I did find it funny. I saw this post the other day when you talk about pulling it out. Somebody posted on WA Lawn Addicts saying, "What is this weed in my lawn and how do I kill it?" And it was like, I don't even know what it was. It might have been, it was the grass. It was a long, tall, grassy weed. And there was one of them in their lawn. Like, in the time it took you to write the post, you could have just yanked it out. And their lawn's like 50 square meters or something tiny. And it's like they were going to go drive to the shop to get a product, drive all the way back, mix it all up and apply it, to wait a week and a half to 4 weeks or however long the product takes to kill this. You just pull it out. I don't know. I don't know why we get stuck in that mindset sometimes that we must spray everything,
Yeah, and it's similar with broadleaf. I speak to some homeowners that will be spraying in February because they've reached their weed threshold in their lawn, and they're spraying again in March because more have germinated, whereas I'll just wait. I can deal with it. As long as the wife doesn't
true.
Any weeds, I'm good.
Are you the sort of person who you talk about turf and deal with turf so much, it's like it gets to a point where you just, I can't be stuck doing it on my own lawn?
I have a mix of areas. I have two areas in my back lawn. First one, the dog absolutely destroys. That's just a buffalo, and the kikuyu is growing through it, and I don't really care too much about that one because the dog's going to dig it up. I've got a tall fescue, which is a bit strange for Sydney, but obviously we used to work in product development, so I have some weird things running around my house. Santarana in the middle, cylinder mower. That's when me and my son play soccer. That's beautifully manicured.
Right.
Not a weed in it type thing. Nice and even colour. And then the front verge is old Queensland blue couch that I talked about because it's an older house, and it struggles. Concrete has poured some concrete on it at one stage, so there's a big dead patch in the middle of it. So not very good advertisement for the brand, but it's one of those, you say you love doing it, but then at times life catches up with you.
Well, Travis up in Bundaberg from the Lawn Lab, he's got Queensland blue couch there, and it is immaculate. It's so well suited to that climate, and it's a striping, and he cuts it so low, and whereas here in WA, like I don't think we have any clients now with Queensland blue, but we used to have one, and it was like, oh, it's a novelty. We're cutting this random,
It can be a fantastic grass, particularly in Queensland. Like so many lawns up there are blue couch, and they look lovely. And you come down to Sydney, but it has an extended dormancy period. Like it doesn't grow for that long in comparison to Queensland. Gets dollar spot like you wouldn't believe. Just not suited to this climate, and you see that with different grass types,
So let's talk about disease then, right? And this is something that I think most of the time you just would be sending a message through, right? Because it's hard, unless I'm missing something. I don't think the fungicides, preventive ones even, they don't really last more than about 4 weeks roughly, right? Is there something out there that is much more longer lasting or not really?
Not really. You can get, 4 weeks is kind of where manufacturers will happily say, it'll last that long, but it all depends on the speed at which the plant's growing and whether it's a contact or a systemic fungicide. How quickly it's metabolized through the plant and whether it's still there or not. Also depends on disease pressure as well. So obviously if there's very little disease pressure, then small amounts of the active will be fine. But it all depends. Look, fungicide usage in home lawns, I definitely wouldn't be going preventatively unless you have a showcase lawn, because you will be doing multiple applications. It does get quite expensive as well. If you're using the more broad spectrum fungicides, can be quite expensive. But it's good to be able to identify I guess, the more common diseases, understand why the more common diseases are occurring, and being able to treat them. So something like dollar spot, seeing how we've already mentioned that, pretty common. You generally see a mycelium sort of spores on top of the surface. Generally, you get sort of the signs and symptoms of it, when you've got really heavy dews, so, going into winter and coming out of winter as well. So that's where it's more likely to cause an issue. One of the most common things I've seen, it tends to pop up on a nitrogen deficient lawn after rainfall. Yeah. So if you can keep your lawn, healthy, nitrogen deficient, then, you shouldn't see it. I've seen a lot of people just fertilize dollar spot out, not actually treat it with fungicide, but actually fertilize it with nitrogen and iron type products, and get it to grow out, basically.
Well, the other thing about dollar spot is it is literally like dots like a dollar coin. And I was going to mention as well that if you're doing a fertilizer program, you are going to have a healthier turf, which will be more resilient to all sorts of stresses, wear and tear, drought, and fungal, diseases. So with dollar spot, I find that one's not too bad to deal with, because like the dots are quite small. If the lawn grows in across from the side as well, I haven't had a lawn ever in my career that just got destroyed by dollar spot. Right? It's quite it goes.
Yeah.
What I have struggled with is a lot of time is brown patch, and is that something that you guys get over east quite a lot?
Not as common in Sydney, no, definitely not. I definitely agree with the dollar spot. It's named after the US silver dollar, because that's the sort of size it is. When they join together, they can become a bit of a problem. But so when they coalesce, but by themselves, not really a threat. Brown patch and yellow patch, or that Rhizoctonia type sort of species, can certainly cause a lot more issue.
Because I've had it before where, and we had a client with this year, maybe I should have got some photos up, where they had it bad last year, and we put some stuff down, and because it happens in the middle of winter, the lawn just doesn't regrow. Like you just have this dead patch for a long, long time. It takes a long time. Even if the disease is gone, you can see there's no active disease. It takes like till spring for it to regrow. So we saw I think I was talking to you about it a couple of weeks ago. Like you were like, "Oh, how you going?" I'm like, "Wet and fungal. That's how everything is over here." And I think we had the wettest June in forever, or whatever, 70 years or something stupid. And so we had heaps of fungal diseases compared to normal. And I regret not putting out some sort of preventative around then, especially on clients that we had a single patch before, or they might have had a little bit before. They ended up having 4 or 5 or 6 patches, and it's just, oh man, once you got it, so hard to get rid of. What would you be recommending for something like that? It's a little bit more serious, a bit of a preventative. What product should I have put down?
So I think it comes back to that programming stuff that we talked about earlier about, some of the issues that you see, like some of the issues, it's a known issue for you that, brown patch or Rhizoctonia is an issue with that lawn. And then obviously understanding diseases and understanding their cycles and what sort of conditions, as you said, you've got really wet conditions that have, cause this sort of issue. Understanding that allows you to be more preventative in nature, because you're sort of going, oh, well, like get lots of fairy ring, or I get lots of Rhizoctonia, or I get dollar spot. So I'm getting dollar spot, I'll add a little bit of nutrition. In the case of Rhizoctonia, there's some more, broad spectrum fungicides that we could be using in that space. Like Impala's a great broad spectrum one that can cover things. If you're having ongoing problems, I definitely recommend getting like a proper disease diagnosis. You can only do so much with photos, and sometimes the photos can be misleading, and there can be multiple diseases impacting the turf. So if you are having problems, it's definitely worth getting a bit of a check from getting a proper disease sample tested.
I also found as well that there are some products out there that slow the growth. If you put a fungicide down on a lawn, it'll actually slow the growth of the lawn. which can then be, you might just, it's not as simple as just looking on the product and going, it says it covers the disease I have, I'll go buy that. Because there might be 3 or 4 others that also do. And by buying one that slows the growth of your lawn, maybe you're in the middle of winter and it's dormant anyway, you might be shooting yourself in the foot there. So is Impala one that slows the growth, or is there ones that in winter you would avoid and maybe use them more in the growing season?
Yeah, look, to answer your question, I guess, look, there are some, and we're starting to get into a very complex area here and things like that. So if you, again, flick us an email, some photos, that sort of stuff, so we can talk about your specific problem, because there's so many different diseases out there. In relation to growth regulatory effects of fungicides, it's a group of fungicides known as triazoles. So generally the things that end in Zole, Z-O-L-E, so propiconazole, tebuconazole, and Impala does contain one of those. So it would have growth inhibition. Now, depending on your grass type, depending on the weather and things like that, that's not a big issue. As you said, in summer, not a big issue. If you've just gone and sprayed it with herbicide, starts to become a bit of an issue, things like that. So,
The last thing I'll say before we touch on to pest control, which I've found quite funny, is when people do turf care programs, right? We might have a client who is I'll give you this story. We had a client whose lawn last year was buffalo, winter, south-facing lawn. So it looked rubbish, right? And we told them, because they didn't do any care, right? It was just mowing. Yep. And so this winter, we were like, you need to go on the program, keep the color, blah, blah, blah. So we've done that, kept the color. Color's looking really good for a buffalo this time of year in Perth. And they get a single fungal patch of, brown patch in their lawn, which is really quite small. And 2 things happened, which was fascinating. The first is the guy was confused, and he wasn't aggressive about it, but he did sort of imply that he thought that my liquid fertilizing might have caused the fungal disease, right? Which is just it's interesting one to, I as soon as I told him what it was, he understood. But, clients get a bit skeptical sometimes like that. Not all of them, but some of them do. But the other thing is that I wonder if you had it last year and no one ever noticed, because it turns the lawn yellow when the lawn was already yellow. So I wonder if people get more that they start noticing these things more. So it's interesting, having something prepared and getting ready to do those applications, having that communication can be really good, because whilst the client might have had they might have had dollar spot every single year, but their lawn was already fairly yellow. So yellow dollar spots don't show up so much. And having that communication at the start of the winter season, hey, you might have some fungal disease pop up, we'll treat them, we're ready for it and all that sort of stuff. It can just be really good to, again, having something in the ute ready to go, depending on, your situation, all that sort of stuff could be really, really helpful. Anything else worth adding before we move on to pest control?
No, not really. I'll probably just say, look, around fungal issues and things like that, we sort of try to keep an eye on the weather and try to put stuff in our newsletters about what's sort of out there. It's a fungal guide on the website and things like that, if they want to check them out and have a bit of a look. And if it all becomes too much, and it's a very complex subject, that's for sure, flick us a photo, some emails, and some, what you've done or what you haven't done and things like that.
Go from there. All right, Matt, I think we've gotten quite nerdy in this already, and we got one more thing I wanted to cover. We're an hour and 23 in. Gee, time flies. I always say that, but it does. The last thing I wanted to talk about was pest control. And pests get blamed for everything, right? Every client's like, I must have lawn beetle, it must have armyworm, whatever it is. You talked about acelepryn before, but we only very briefly talked. So mention why acelepryn is so good, because honestly, this has been one of the best things I think I use in my programs, period. It just works, and it's amazing. So tell us about acelepryn.
Yeah, look, Celiprim's a great product. Look, it's I think it's coming up on about 20 years now that it's been around, but obviously into this home garden space, probably people became aware of it thanks to sort of a lot of those lawn groups and things like that. So, another benefit of those lawn groups. Look, I'm a big fan of it because it's so broad spectrum. You've got granular, you've got a liquid option, you've got a couple of different things there. From a perspective of using around the home garden and just using in general, it is a non-scheduled product, and sort of comes. You can put it out there and water it in, and you're going to be fine. And it's got what they call low mammalian toxicity, so there's no risk to dogs. It really binds in the soil, so you're going to get that sort of the really longevity of coverage. It can work on your caterpillars like your armyworm for sort of up to 4 months. And then you get about 6 months coverage on your African black beetle and things like that. So yeah, really handy product, really.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. You put it down, and it just gives you a lot of peace of mind. And like we talked about originally, when you're a contractor working at someone's property, if you get an armyworm outbreak the day after you mow the lawn, and you come back 2 weeks later, like that lawn has huge problems. If someone's away on holidays or whatever, and they don't tell you, you don't notice it. And putting the Celiprim down, giving you that 4 or 6 months control, you can do that. Really, you can get away with one application a year if you time it right. And that will cover the vast majority of the problems that you're likely to have. At least that's the case in Perth. Maybe in some different areas where bugs might be a bit more active across the country. But it's just...
Definitely, armyworm's definitely in that top end around Queensland and things like that. It's active earlier, and so the 4 month coverage, you're probably looking at a second application to be fully covered against armyworm.
But even then, two applications is nothing, because if you have a problem where, and I've had this before with a lot of products would have bifenthrin in them, right, which is like a really common, for those who don't know, really common insecticide used on all sorts of things, right? Like outdoor sprays to, crops and whatever, right? I've had it before where I've had an outbreak of cutworm or sodwebworm or whatever you call it. Looks like armyworm, a little bit smaller. And I've applied it correctly, didn't have any, external issues that would affect it. And I didn't really get a proper treatment. And I think it was because it's a contact insecticide, and my lawn was quite thick and matted. And if, there might have been some that were in certain areas that maybe the water didn't quite get to, or I had some sort of problem like that. And that's in my own personal lawn. And I, since using a Celiprim, haven't had those problems again, or I didn't really have those problems while I was using it. So it's not just a case of, well, you're insured, and if you put down a post-immersion application, you're saving yourself using a harsh chemical, and you're saving yourself, being slow to respond. Sometimes, at least I've found, even putting down a post-immersion, you may need to come again and do a second application or something. So that's one I would say is, if anybody's looking to a lawn care program, right? You've got your basics. That is fundamental to anything, really.
Yeah, and look, the bifenthrin products, they have their uses. It's what they call a group of insecticides called synthetic pyrethroids, and so they end in THRIN. They're great for fast knockdown. If you have a look under your kitchen sink, you'll probably find a synthetic pyrethroid like permethrin or something like that in your fly spray. Like they are designed to knock down fast, which is great. But if you're dealing with something like armyworm that has a very short life cycle, you can knock out the sort of the larvae or the little armyworm, the caterpillar that's crawling along your surface, but then all the eggs in the soil will come back, and then they'll grow again, and sort of within 1 to 2 weeks you'll be dealing with them again, where there's a Celiprim to knock down, and then the future life cycles as well.
So how good is a Celiprim as a knockdown? Because I've heard that there's some I've never really used it as a knockdown, to be honest, because we've always just had it already in the soil.
Yeah, it's not as effective. Even with African black beetle, it's better to get the early instars, as they call them, in the life cycle. So you're better off putting it out earlier rather than later for better results. Look, if you've got bifenthrin, I'd use that as a knockdown, then follow up with a celiprin. That's what I'd be doing if I had armyworm. And when you're dealing with armyworm, you want fast knockdown. Like, as you said, they can decimate a lawn in sort of I've seen them in one night. More commonly, it's sort of like 3 to 7 nights. Your lawn is completely gone. I suppose the positive about armyworm is they usually only eat the leaf. So they usually leave a lot of the growing points, whereas African black beetle, they leave a lot of the growing points, so you can fertilize it and the leaf will
come back. Yeah, the roots are there. What's under the soil is still there. It's not a death sentence, but it's horrible.
It looks like it, but it's not.
It does.
Whereas something like African black beetle, it is more of a death sentence because they'll chew out the roots, and the lawn doesn't really recover from that because it can't touch water or nutrients.
Well, I don't know what it's like over east, but we almost never get any African black beetle, right? Like, I mean, it's almost, I would say it's most of our problems are the cutworm, which is quite good because it makes the lawn look thin and ugly, but they're not as vigorous as the armyworm. I'd say 60-70% of cutworm, and then the rest is armyworm. And then every now and then you might see a black beetle, right? You'll see them around, but I've never really noticed. I don't think I have, at least. Maybe I've misdiagnosed it, but I really, honestly, just don't ever really notice that many black beetles. Is that the same over east, or is the climate different?
Look, over here we definitely have African black beetle, that's for sure. I'll have to import some to WA next time I go over there.
Please don't.
Might get in a bit of trouble for that. So look, it's definitely a bigger issue over here. Kikuyu lawns, we get a lot of billbug as well. And billbug can be quite devastating to kikuyu lawns. It's probably, if you're seeing damage earlier in the season, like August, you're probably, in September, if you're seeing damage then, it's more likely billbug. African black beetles damage you start to see more around Christmas, December area. It's one of those things where the damage is done in September to the roots, and September, October, the damage is done to the roots, and then once it starts to dry out in December, you start to really see that damage. So you've got to be proactive with that one. That's one of the, if you're going to do a preventative, I'd do that before a pre-emergent, because at least you'll have grass.
Well, I have found as well that firstly is when would you apply a celiprin over in Sydney? When would be the best time to do that?
In Sydney, look, I'd be looking towards the end of August. It's one of those things where it is a little bit more soil temperature related, so we're not going to run out of it. And the pests that I'm seeing the most of is African black beetle and billbugs. So going in that sort of mid to late August, you're getting in there at the right time. And the other thing is, because those they generally only have one generation per cycle, per life cycle. If you're wearing out at the end of the season, it's not a big deal because they're not they're not laying more eggs and becoming larvae again. So it's not such a big deal. But I do that, and then I do monitor sort of armyworm traffic. You can generally monitor it pretty well on social media with people going, "Oh, I've got armyworm."
Yes, true. You can do that now.
You can slowly see it coming down the coast, and then once people start to get it in Coffs Harbour, you start to get a bit concerned for those on the East Coast. But generally it overwinters in Queensland, doesn't survive in the cooler climates, and then as it you get different generations of the armyworm, it moves further and further south. People in Victoria probably don't know what we're talking about here, but in Sydney, it's less of an issue. So me running out of, active ingredient in the soil at the end of the season is not so big a deal.
Well, still, like we said, it's only a couple of applications. What we usually do, and it sounds like it's very similar to you guys, you can mix the celiprin and barricade together. And, You can also put them with, I would definitely recommend doing a jar test, which is where you actually mix them in a jar with some water first to see if they're going to react or anything. But a Acelepryn barricade, a seaweed product, a kelp product, and a wetting agent is what we apply all at once, usually in September. And we try, and we haven't touched on this, and we just don't have the time to. Maybe we'll do another day. But you can, when you start doing a liquid product applications, you can, as long as you're testing it, you can mix a lot of different things together. Like I know you can put like Primo Max with a liquid fertilizer, so you like specifically an iron, so you can both increase the color, like help the leaf growth. You can put some insecticides. It gets complicated. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but you can do multiple applications at once.
Yeah,
and that's all we do for pest control. And then we have a bifenthrin product in the car. Which one do we have the trace to? It's Surefire 5-star, I think, isn't it?
On the website, it's Surefire Fortune Ultra is the bifenthrin product.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I'm trying to look at it now. Anyways, there's so many options. There's a few more on there that we won't, Phenopryl and media cloprid, or however you pronounce it. Just killing mosquitoes here. If people wondering why I'm doing all the dance moves, but just having the bifenthrin ready to go, just in case, and just keeping that on the ute is just as a precaution. And honestly, we don't really get problems. And I know that you're saying 4-month control, but I wonder if they're saying that to be a little bit safe, because we still find in March that we're not getting that many problems, if any problems, from a September application of.
Yeah. It depends on the grub. If you're not having problems with armyworm, then you'll get more than 6 months out of it, to be honest.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. Like I said before, armyworm and solid webworm or cutworm, they're the ones. We're getting all the worms. I don't know. You guys getting the bugs? I had never heard about billbug until maybe a year ago, when it was actually your colleague, Kevin, mentioned something. Somebody had said, I've got a problem in my lawn, and he was like, oh, it's probably billbug. And they were like, yeah, it is. They worked it out. And I was like, yeah, what's this billbug thing? That's just a Eastern States thing. There's one more thing we didn't talk about. I realized we should have talked about way about at the beginning, which is aeration. Right, it's got nothing to do with any product applications or anything, but it's also a super beneficial thing to be doing, along with the mowing and verti mowing and scalping, all that sort of stuff. How often would you guys be aerating over east?
Yeah, so look, aeration, it depends. It's not the most common practice over here. When you go back into golf greens and things like that, obviously you're looking for firmer greens and things like that. You're aerating twice a year. You're looking to remove 20% of the material per year, basically, to reduce that thatch and keep them nice and firm. Very challenging thing to do. So you'd often do 2 big cores and then lots of mini cores throughout the season. Coring is a two-fold process. So first of all, you're reducing compaction in the soil, but you're also looking to remove thatch. So you can do sort of what they call solid tining. So it's a solid needle tine that goes in that reduces compaction. So that's something you could do if you didn't actually have a thatch issue, but you had a compaction issue. So around renovations, there's a lot of these different sort of terminologies that and they get a bit confusing. Renovation, like coring, isn't overly common, I'll admit. It's obviously a high expense. You've either got hire machinery or buy your own type thing. So not very commonly done, to be honest.
Interesting. Whereas over here, it's become quite popular, but I wonder if it's because, again, the soil profile, we just don't really have anything other than sand, so it does get compacted and quite difficult. It sounds like you look, we're at an hour and 40 almost, like just on an hour and 40. So And your dog sounds like it needs some love and attention there in the background as well.
He's ready for lunch.
He's ready for lunch. Probably so are you. So look, people, I'm going to put Ian's email address. Or is there a contact form on the website that might be better to go through at the Lawn Shed?
Yeah. There's a contact form. There's an email address. There's you can contact us on Facebook Messenger. There's a mobile number. Yeah, there's just everything.
However you can find it, get into Ian. If you have any more questions, go with that. Sign up for a trade account and mention that you heard of us through the Australian Lawn and Garden podcast. If you do, go through the Lawn Shed. And hopefully that's at least helping people get a start into what they need to be doing to help their clients get some good programs and transition from somebody who just sort of does what people ask to somebody who can recommend and solve problems and have all the fun and enjoyment that comes with that. Thanks for coming on, Ian.
Cool. Anytime, Luke. See you later.